So I have a confession before I introduce myself. My name's, well, maybe I'll kick off by introducing myself. My name is Mauro Fiore. I added the V because if you Google Mauro Fiore, you'll find a very, very famous cinematographer. He won an Oscar for Avatar. In fact, the day he won an Oscar, my Facebook lit up with all these friend requests. I'm not that person, although sometimes I think maybe I should pretend that I am that person. My confession is I've been doing games 23 years, which is a long time. It's actually the whole topic of the talk. But I've never done a conference. I've never actually spoken at a conference. But I did give this talk, and it was the first time talking in public a month ago in Perth for Screen West, and everyone really enjoyed it. So I was like, okay, let's do it for GCAP. Let's do it real. Let's get some conference experience in, and let's see how it goes. The joke I made back then was, okay, this is like, early access or prototype or alpha, beta, whatever we're calling it nowadays. This is more like 2.0. Which, if I'll keep the gaming joke going, it usually never comes out better than, you always expect it's going to be better than 1.0, but more often than not, it's worse. But so we'll take that. Maybe we'll change that this time. So yeah, 23 years doing games, 20 plus years. I started in the year 2000, which just makes it super easy to remember. Also married my wife in 2010. Also recommend doing that if you want to keep track of anniversaries. I've done 4 major beats in my career. I worked at Rockstar Games in San Diego, and I did that for 10 years doing AAA console work. Then I went and did Zynga, which we'll talk about as honestly night and day from Rockstar, but did that, and that was in the Facebook days, doing Facebook social. Then I did a little stint at 4Game and Lion Kong. Those are both Chinese companies, but it was the job was still in San Francisco. But that was really getting some exposure doing mobile games and entering that market. And now here I am in Melbourne, working for Electronic Arts, doing kind of a mix, right? AAA mobile games with real racing and The Sims. I will kind of pause here and just call out that I do work for EA, but what I'm saying here today is really my own opinion, right? I speak for myself and not for EA. And it'll become more important near the end of the talk because I have all kinds of opinions about the market and where things should go and not go. Anyway, they're my opinions. They're not what EA necessarily thinks. So just to be really clear on that. And I think I see my lawyer out in the audience, so thank you. All right, let's continue. This guy is dead, as you can probably tell by his statuesque, but he was Heraclitus, and he had a really lovely saying, or at least the books that are left over quote him on this, which is the only constant in life is change. And I really, really take that to heart, but not only in life, but in games, right? The only thing constant in games is change. Let alone, 23 years, you're going to see a lot has changed. This past week, a lot has changed. If you think about Unity and Unreal and even the layoffs at Epic and all this stuff, right? So constant change. And I used to say to everyone who listens is there's never a dull moment in games. So if you're, in fact, one of the first questions I ask anyone when I interview is say, why would you foolishly choose a career in games? Just be ready that everything's going to change all the time. So you have to be quite flexible and ready to embrace that kind of change. But with change, there's always a beginning. Right? For me, my origin story was chickenpox. Thankfully, there's a vaccine now. If you haven't gotten it, please get it because you don't want to have chickenpox. But I got chickenpox. And my dad ran out to Sears and got me an Atari 2600. So I grew up playing Asteroids and Combat. And funny enough, my father was, still is, a car mechanic. So he was in a car. So he played a lot of racing games growing up. I call this out because it turns out I ended up working on racing games, right? And it turns out I have an affinity towards racing. And it all kind of started back then. And it also, the fact that my dad came and gave me that gift, when I give my daughter a gift, I always think, is this going to be the thing that's going to kick off her career, her ambition? So you never know where inspiration will come, where that moment will come. You always want to be kind of receptive towards that moment and looking out for that opportunity. So yeah, before you can talk about change, you can talk about foundations. Right? So before all that, Rockstar, Zynga, Electronic Arts, I went to university. Well, I grew up playing games. I love computers, coding, and art. So I went to Carnegie Mellon, and I got a degree in computer science, but I also minored in art at the same time. But the key here is I minored in art, but I can't draw or sketch or paint, or I can't do anything, like when it comes to traditional fine arts. But I did have a pretty good inkling about robotic art, you know, building circuit boards, building sensors. And so that's what I did. I dove right in and built that kind of stuff. And then as I was graduating in 2000, the university was starting a master's program in Entertainment Technology Center. It's actually quite famous now. A lot of great graduates came out of that. And so I did a lot of interesting work there in location-based entertainment. We were working on VR, which I don't know if you've never heard, but it's kind of popular. Maybe not as popular as AR will be. We'll get to that. But I did a lot of work in VR 20 years ago using some of Disney's tech. Also did some work with novel interfaces. This is a DeLorean, where we had to build an interface to control music. It's funny, again, because my friend who worked with me on this project sent me a picture of like Lexus's new interface, and it was a lot similar to this, so 20 years ago, doing similar work. But and lastly, I did a VR project that I called Slaughterhouse back in the day. The coolest thing about VR for me was the ability to really change your perspective and make you feel like you were someone. So I was a vegan at the time, so we did a VR where you play as the cow at a slaughterhouse. So there's a lot of anticipation. You just see the cow in front of you's butt the whole time, and you're kind of waiting for that moment that you die. And kind of a little bit of cosmic coincidence stuff. This engine that we were using is kind of really prone to corruption, prone to freaking out all the time. So right at the moment that the death sequence was going to happen, it went completely bonkers. Just changed the camera to all these random locations, changed the animation, structure to all these random, poses. It reminded me of the freak out section in Event Horizon. You know that movie? You know the very end where it just goes absolutely insane? That's pretty much what happened there, and it couldn't have been more appropriate. It was better than what I would have planned for a death sequence of a cow. But it's an important lesson for me in terms of this technology is a great mechanism for doing kind of activism work or just getting message across and getting some real perspective in what you do. I took this course in my graduate studies, and I want to do a whole slide on it because it was probably the most important course I ever took, and I still reference it to this day, 3 years later, and that's improvisational acting, and Brenda was the teacher. She's, I think, still teaching there, which is fantastic. And it's really about learning to accept and listen to your fellow team members, and to do, if you ever watch improv or partake in improv, you know how important it is to yes and your coworkers, which is to take that idea and embrace it and see where it goes, particularly if you disagree. If you know in your heart you disagree, just, humor me is, I guess, the attitude you should have, right? Yes and see where it goes. See where that idea can take you. You might surprise yourself, and it's going to create a more inclusive conversation and attitude. So it's a really important lesson. Like, I've met architect students, and they make great level designers. And when I meet improvisational actor students, they make great game designers. So please take that to heart every day you can. And read a book on improv and do improv. So here's some tidbits of insight, First of all, technology is our canvas. It's always been with me as a tool, but every time technology advances, please take that to heart and embrace it and see where it takes you in games. And the history of art and science informs the future. A couple other courses I took were the history of art, a whole thing on French film, which you should really follow the French directors. They're fantastic. But it helps dictate what the future could be. And then through improv, yes, we are stronger together. I had put this deck together when Mandalorian was on, and I couldn't help but pick up on that line over and over again. And it's true. Together we are stronger. All right, so from graduate school, I jumped over to my first job, and it was actually as an intern. So every year I hire interns. I started as an intern. It's the best way into the industry, I think, at least it was for me. But it was trial by fire. And let me tell you one thing. So my very first day on the job, I arrive at Angel Studios in San Diego, like, hey, here I am. And they're like, here's this box of concept art. Why don't you go and sort it? I'm like, all right, a little weird, but it's my first day, I'll do what you want. So I organized this box of concept art. And at the end of the day, I actually walked into HR's office. And I said, I'm not sure why I was hired, as a game design intern, but, I don't think it should be to sort concept art. So I was like, I don't know what's going on here. And that was really ballsy, I was kind of like, wow, that could have been the end of the talk, end of my entire game design career. But they were awesome there, so awesome. And so what she did is she went and go talk to Fred Marcus, who was the design director at the time. And he had me go and play Cars in Midtown Madness 2, which was the game he was working on. I gave my feedback. He liked what I said. And then he brought me into his office, and we finished Midtown Madness 2 together. I mean, he did most of the work. I did some races. I tuned the mouse controls for the PC title. But trial by fire, because right there on the job, three months, we finished the game. 80% of the work in games happens in the last 20% of the time in development. So I really, really learned so much from him. I consider him my #1 mentor in gaming. So I, look for mentors. That's kind of the advice, is as you get in there, look for people who will take you under their wing and learn from them, because they're extremely valuable. But it also is a lesson on just being proactive. If you see something, go after it. It could have been the end of my career. It ended up being the most important decision of my career, because off I went. I ended up being lead game designer for Midnight Club 2, and then also 3. And then I needed to mix things up, so I went and became senior technical director for Red Dead Redemption. So that's 10 years. Got 2.5, and then 5 years for Red Dead. I didn't think it was going to take 5, but it did. So what did Fred teach me? Mostly about the 3 C's: camera, control, and character. He had just finished working with Nintendo on the Dream Team, and they had all those same kind of principles. So when I talk about 3 C's, here's a couple videos that really caught my eye. This first one was from God of War. Let me just facilitate the technical stuff and bring this video over.
We were watching, I think it was these weird underground Russian Fight Club videos. I would show them on the frame of frame and say if somebody hits, and you could see that it doesn't go like this, right? It goes and then stops and then kind of glances off, the body goes, and then they kind of swipe back through.
This is Cory Barlog, the director of God of War. He's talking about design.
So really important animation principle about stopping, right? You just play animation, there's no impact, there's no weight, boom. Really important. And then, lo and behold, I'm watching another video from Smash Brothers. Same idea.
この仕様というカテゴリーではゲーム内に組み込む仕組みの考え方などについて話をしていきます。企画ゲーム設計カテゴリーとの、境界線は曖昧ですが、よりコンピューターと付き合うということを想定した内容だと思ってください。では始めます。ストップ演出、どんどん入れていきましょう。今回の話は割と大事だと思っています。ヒットストップという仕様があります。これは例えば相手を攻撃したとき少しだけ止まっている時間の演出を指します。これが
So yeah, I just wanted to show those two because there's 2 different games, same principle. Okay, but it's these important principles that, remember I titled this whole section, foundations of change and trial by fire. This is the stuff Fred taught me, which is the most important part of games, in my opinion, is the controls, the camera, the character. You have to have the basics down. So we're going to go through the whole career, and I'm going to talk about change and adapting to change, but honestly, you can't do any of that if you don't have your fundamentals down. Right? So that's the most important, critical thing, is to really get the fundamentals of game, particularly in video games, down. That's the title if you want to watch or Google it later and watch it later. In terms of fundamentals, this book I consider the Bible, or, in UX, the Gestalt principles, the really good principles. I consider this the equivalent for game design. And it just so happens that Jesse Schell ended up writing it. I took that, out of Carnegie Mellon, Randy Pausch taught Building Virtual World. That's where I did most of the VR work. It turns out Jesse ended up taking over for Randy and teaching that course. But this is, if you're going to read any book on game design, this is the one to read. And you should, know it by heart. There's one principle I want to demonstrate or talk about, which is the theory of flow. It's a theory on psychology, but it basically is, if you try to graph like your skills, and your challenges, right? If something's like too hard and you suck at it, like that's frustrating. But if you're really good at something and the challenge is kind of boring, well, you're like, well, this is boring, right? But somewhere in the middle is that sweet spot, right? And it's really important to me because it actually translates into a physical feeling. I think of it like as a runner's high. You're like so in the zone that it's pure bliss. It actually translates to happiness. It's doing something with your brain. So really cool principle, psychological, and it shows up at games a lot. That's the psychologist. I'll never, anyone try to, I can't say his name. I'm sorry. Yeah. Favorite game of all time, if I want to ask me, it's Tetris Attack on the Super Nintendo. It's been remade a couple times, and every Match 3 game out there on mobile owes it to this game. But in principle, this theory of flow, right? So you get stacked all this junk, right? And then when you clear something that touches it, that junk turns into offense. So you get this incredible feeling of, oh my God, I'm gonna die. I got all this junk on top of me. Wait a minute, last threat. You get all that junk turned into playable, and then you can send even bigger junk over to your opponent. And now you're like, oh, now I'm kicking ass, right? And it occurred to me that transition of flow, where I'm like, oh, I'm gonna die, or I'm kicking butt, was inducing that same rush. So on Midnight Club, one of the first features I designed was Slipstream Turbo. And it was because I was having that same realization when I was in racing, that if I'm behind, I'm frustrated and I can't get ahead. And you're still racing well, or you're doing it, you still can't get ahead. But what if I translated that and be able to charge like a meter and then blast ahead? All of a sudden now I'm on the other side of that flow channel. So it was a big rush. So it was one mechanic that I designed in using that philosophy in mind. The other thing is exaggeration too. Exaggerated that effect, right? Because there's a natural phenomenon if you drag behind something, you become faster. But this is about exaggeration, which is another principle you really should use. So that was great. I think that was a really successful game. Here's a picture of me back then when I was younger. Next Gen did an article about universities that have game designs in there. So I could do a whole talk on Midnight Club if I wanted to, but this is all about just advancing through the years as rapidly as we can. I went to go do Red Dead Redemption to do something different. And I had kind of a realization. First of all, this was around 2005 to 2010. Poker was really popular on TV, and it's a call out I want to make. When things are popular, when things are culturally relevant, you, as a game designers, really need to embrace that and pick up on it and say, wait a minute, we're all playing poker at home. This other thing happened too, which was Gun, as a game from Activision, had just come out, and it was a Western, right? And so we're here doing Red Dead. I'm like, oh, we should go play that. And I played it. It's a fine game. But in that game, they have poker. But it was like a 2D Flash implementation. And I was like, wow, and I was immediately taken back to that VR work I did at Carnegie Mellon. And I was like, you know what? We can probably make this more immersive, more in the game. And of course, poker's so important in Westerns. So I went ahead and hacked it together. Just hacked it together. No one told me to do anything. I guess it goes back to that day with the box art, with the box of concept art. Just do it. And put it together and got it up and running. And then that led to doing all the mini games of Red Dead Redemption. People would walk by and be like, oh my God, you're playing poker? I'm like, yeah. It's like, you should do all the games. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'll do all of them. But it was cool, because I didn't even know Liar's Dice was a game. I asked all my coworkers, like, what games? Oh, have you played this? They called it something else, too. It wasn't Liar's Dice. It was like Devil's Dice, I think it was. But that ended up being pretty good for the Western, too. And then Horseshoes was amazing, basically fun to work with, because they had such a good physics engine in those days. And so we just released the Horseshoe, and off it goes. And then Five Finger Fillet was good fun. Yeah, so I'm laughing because literally these psychos at work would come and literally try to make me play Five Finger Fillet, in real life. I'm like, okay, stop, let's do it virtually. All right, so, sorry, first time I did this talk, it ran long, so I'm like, oh shoot, I gotta hurry up. So, time. It always comes at this part too, it's funny. Because this is the part I need to slow down. This is the most important slide of the whole deck. At least it is for me. And I say that, I warn you all, because I think at the end of the slide, a lot of you, myself included, I'd be like, yeah, that's not that interesting. It's actually pretty boring. And it is. But it's, for me, personally, the most important slide. And that's, so I was working on Red Dead Redemption, right? And it occurred to me, okay, that roughly, that game takes place in 1910. Roughly, it's supposed to be the death of the West. And you got horse and buggy, right? And here we are in 2010, and I actually had this realization in 2007, to be exact, because I turned 30 years old in 2007. Now I'm 46, but back then, 30 years old. I'm like, okay, what's the deal? Well, Red Dead happened in 1910, it's 2010, that's 100 years, right? But when you actually look at it in terms of decades, right, it's actually only 10 decades, of which I've been alive 3 of those 10. So it was in this moment, for me personally, that time absolutely compressed into this crazy thing. 100 years was I don't relate, I can't understand it, but 10, oh, I can deal with 10, and 3 of 10 is even more like, whoa. For me, it blew my mind, which is like time was really compressing on me, and it gave me a lot of perspective. And this is a saying I've been saying to myself forever, but it had more relevance now than any other time, which is time shifts. It doesn't just flow, right? And it certainly does flow. And the fact that Einstein, if you go watch Oppenheimer, the fact that time seems to be so ingrained in the fabric of the universe, in space, it's above my pay grade, but that just fascinates me beyond anything, how important time is. And it operates in this very analog kind of way. It's a signal that just seems to flow, 1 second to the next, 1 second to the next. But the way we experience time, it's like sampling. We're like sampling an analog signal, and we can see it in these intervals. And that's our perception of time. So not only is it flowing, it's literally shifting. Right, and I use that phrase when I'm sick, I say this to myself, like, before you know it, you're not going to be sick. And that's the way, right? A week or two, you're like, whoa, time shifted, I'm not sick anymore. Once you have kids, all these things happen. But this is critical for the way I understand the world. And look, here's a proxy. Again, this is going to be like, duh, not that interesting. But for me, the proxy was music technology. I grew up in the 70s. The car I first remember had an 8-track player in it. Then we have cassettes. We have CDs, we have MP3s. It was kind of like really amazing how it's lined up by decade, right? And then, lo and behold, now we have streaming in the 10s, and we're 3 years into this decade. What's next? Well, we'll talk about it at the end. But this is a critical way of thinking about not just my career, but the world itself. When we talk about age, I do want to throw in there. That age discrimination, it's illegal, right? And it's also as damaging as all the other discriminations, whether it's gender or sexual identity or neurodiversity. Age discrimination is the same. And in the same way that a diverse team makes it better, so does age. Because we have different perspectives and we can offer all kinds of things and different life experiences with children and so forth. Our days are different. One technique, though, I also want to encourage is reverse mentoring, right? So typically managers mentor juniors, like, oh, I know this, and I know this, I know this. But the reverse is actually super helpful, because usually people early in their career are coming out of uni, and they just learned the more relevant techniques, right? And I think doctors do this a lot, too, like here's laparoscopic surgery and so on. But I encourage you to kind of set these kind of things up in your company to have not just top-down management, but also reverse mentoring. So just to kind of wrap up there, look, champion the work that you're doing, be an advocate for yourself, get down to those fundamentals, observe the culture, and try to react to it because it's really the way the world works. And time shifts, so don't be left behind. And don't discriminate. Don't be a jerk, seriously. All right, now let's do oil and water because I was a rock star for 10 years. Why don't we go join Zynga? And I get a real chuckle, the fact that Take-Two bought Zynga. Now it's like full circle. It's just one big soup out there. But culture, the first thing I learned real quick that the culture was different. The first thing I did at Zynga was delay a feature. I was like, this isn't right, let's delay it. Which at Rockstar, big deal, right? Take 5 years to make a game. But then I went to a talk, and they're like, oh yeah, week over week revenue is down X% because the feature of the week didn't ship. I'm like, oh, that's my fault. And so all of a sudden, real quick, you learn that different companies have different rules, different constraints, and so you need to adapt. Particularly as a designer, designing with constraints actually makes you a better designer because you have to figure out what to cut and what to keep. But this, so yeah, different games as a service requires different disciplines. You have to react to deadlines more extensively. All these millions of new players, at the time that I joined, Cityville had 17, 20 million daily active users, which is just mind-boggling to think of, but so many people were playing the games, and these are games they were the first games many millions of players were playing for the first time. So coming from Rockstar, huge difference in understanding different players and their mindset and learning to have real empathy, not just sympathy, but empathy for these different player motivations. We'll see that the platform dependencies ends up being not just an opportunity, but a risk as well. And Zynga had a quarterly compensation scheme. And I bring that up because if you're setting up a company, it's just really important to understand how you're incentivizing things. So quarterly means every 3 months. So every 3 months you try to be the best. But if you have a goal that's a year or 2 years, sometimes quarterly is not the best metric to use. But it really drove particular behaviors based on those incentives. So how you incentivize is going to drive behavior. So just be really, really aware of that, particularly in your early days as you try to set up the culture. But the other thing was at Zynga was the density of talent was enormous. You'll actually find now, if you look at the history of Zynga and where those people are today, most of them are CEOs of their own company. This was really a place to learn how to be your own boss and to drive your own ambition. So I did social games at Zynga. We did Cityville and Farmville 2, both on Facebook. I did a feature called Halloween, where monsters move into your city. It's actually really cute, really fun. They show up on a ghost ship as if they're on the Mayflower looking for a new home, and you got to build all these amazing monster buildings for them to move in. I'm going on about this because it introduced a population system. It was incremental population on top of the existing population, and that event system ended up being reused a few times. Rainbow was another successful feature where you built a rainbow and you would post different color rainbows to your feed. And again, I bring that one up because I actually had the idea for that during a dream while I was working on this big feature called Downtown. And so I was supposed to be focusing on this big feature I did. It took 3 months of work. Downtown ended up being kind of a dud. It didn't really work, but Rainbow ended up being the good one. And that was just a dream. So you never know when inspiration's going to come, and just ride it out. Yeah, Downtown, I forgot to mention, actually, the whole beginning of the talk, I said this the first time I did it, but I'm acutely aware of tall poppy syndrome, And when I started doing this talk, I'm like, man, this talk's just all about me. People are going to hate this talk. It's just about me, all the stuff I did. But I'm pausing here because it's this is a time I failed. I absolutely this didn't work. And so I want to include that here because you want to learn, you want to be as humble as possible and also learn from your failures often. And it didn't work because we tried to do too much, okay? That's a lesson here, trying to do too much at once Not all of it landed, and in fact, the expansions they did after that ended up including the population system from Halloween. So I thought that was interesting. Farmville 2 did some lovely work on that. We had like hosting a romantic outdoor dinner, was tying the existing narrative to a really cool event where you're collecting truffles in the dirt, and you can actually, was paying off this romance that was only hinted at in the game. And then fishing was, I think, the first time we charged or allowed players to pay for early access, which, Starfield just went out, and that's early access. I don't know, maybe pioneered that. I doubt it, though. And fishing was one of the last things I did there. And there I used Unity to do some camera mock-ups, and ended up doing a course on how to use Unity for rapid prototyping, because it's a good tool for designers to have if you want to show, not tell. Just go in and mock things up, right? And just show what you think the camera should look like, for example, in this. And some other little things like ice sculptures and holiday lights, which is cute. I was interviewing someone, and they were at India, and they're like, oh, I work at India Zynga, and they still use that book motif as a wrapper. And it's cute. I love storybooks. They're just beautiful little containers of joy. So wrapping that up, look, there are different ways of working, different priorities. So align and culture, huge in what you set up. And the power of platform, I might have glossed over this. I'll hit on it now. Facebook, right? Cityville and Farmville 2. Cityville, you can't even play anymore. And Facebook essentially, boiled the frog and then turned it off. So with a platform comes all this opportunity, but also a lot of risk, right? And look, we see that today. If you built a game in Unity, you're probably asking yourself, maybe that wasn't the greatest choice. So it's always critical that you kind of hedge your bets. That's kind of my attitude, which is just understand the risk going into something and have contingency plans for when they don't work, so you can kind of back out of it. And players, they drive your success. So really understand your players and who's playing your game, because at Rockstar and Farmville are different players. And yeah, use those repeatable systems, because you want to get your return on the investment. Okay, so now something crazy, right? And going small. I left Zynga because they weren't moving to mobile fast enough. Now they've course corrected since then, but at the time they weren't. I mean, this is the day I'm working on Farmville, and I'm playing Heyday on my phone, and this isn't lining up. We should be playing Farmville on the phone. So anyway, I left to do something completely different and small, to do a game for game. And this was also my first opportunity to make a game from scratch. So made a game called Battle Core. The name's since been taken by some first-person shooter. In fact, I got a call from an Activision recruiter because they thought I made that game. They wanted me to do Call of Duty. And I'm like, no, it's this game. They're like, oh, we don't talk to you anymore. I'm like, okay. Anyways, this is a match 3 RPG that borrowed a lot from mobile match 3 games. Puzzles and Dragons was a strong influence here in terms of the meta. But what he did is took that board and wrapped around a cylinder. And if anyone paid attention earlier, I mentioned Tetris Attack being my favorite game. Well, Pokemon Puzzle League is the version on the N64, and they took the board and wrapped it around a cylinder. So I stole it from them, and that's how good artists work, right? But it was a lot of fun, because spinning that board on the phone tactily feels amazing. Just you can picture it right now. It just feels so good. And the work we did creating the characters, had big plans for this game. It was going to be a whole IP franchise, do a whole RTS, it looks like Overwatch, doesn't it? I mean, you could just be like anything. So big plans for this game. We put it out, we did tests. We put out an earlier version, it did okay, and then we put out this version, it did better. And then my boss tells me that 4 games pulled the funding, we're done. You have to say goodbye to this game because they own the rights to all that. So this is my first that sucked moment in games. So for all you kind of I don't know, this is also the first time that I had to put out something by myself and watched struggling to get users, I think we paid for like 1,000 users. I actually had one payer in that. I was like, oh my God, there's no content in this game, but someone actually paid for it. So I was like really, really getting excited, but had to say goodbye to it. And then Lion Kong actually took over for us. But before I get to that, I do want to show this really important video about innovation.
What I'd like to know is, where did you get the confidence from to make a film with such...
Ignorance, sheer ignorance. There's no confidence to equal it. It's only when you know something about a profession, I think, that you're timid or careful.
How does ignorance show itself?
I thought you could do anything with a camera that the eye could do or the imagination could do. And if you come up from the bottom in the film business, you're taught all the things that the cameraman doesn't want to attempt for fear he will be criticized for having failed.
Yes.
And in this case, I had a cameraman who didn't care if he was criticized if he failed, and I didn't know that there were things you couldn't do. So anything I could think up in my dreams, I attempted to photograph.
So I'm not Orson Welles, by the way. I'm not saying that I am. But it resonated with me quite a bit because I felt when I was doing Battlecore that I was being quite innovative. And I actually felt in the Midnight Club era that I was being extremely innovative. I thought, oh, the slipstream turbo and two-wheel driving and burnout and motorcycle. I was like, oh my God, this is so innovative. And it's important, I think, to embrace this attitude, yeah? But I'll get back to the but in a second. This attitude, though, right? This idea that you can manifest your dreams into reality, I think it's a big reason we're all in games. This fearlessness is critical. This idea of rebelling the status quo, I resonate with that. The whole vegan work I did earlier, I'm like, yeah, this is an out. The spirit of curiosity, yeah, critical. And this courage to fail. These are all really, really important pieces of keeping that attitude going into something to be creative. But the big but is having a balanced approach, because even though I felt super innovative on Midnight Club, it's only now with the presence of hindsight and I guess aging that I realized, I didn't make Open City Racing. Right? I worked on Midtown Madness 2. Right? I didn't work on a lot of tech, huge amount of tech involved to get that thing running in memory and later streaming. Like I didn't work on the physics engine, right? That allowed we do all these incredible car handling controls. So and so much of it was existing. And certainly on Battlecore, I borrowed heavily from Puzzles and Dragons and other match 3. So much is actually existing. And then a certain percentage above that is about improving. So like when Midnight Club 2, right, I had one to work off of, and say like the checkpoints. In one, you just have these beams of light that say race here. Well, in 2, we added little arrows in the checkpoints so you can know where the next one was. That's an improvement, right? So much can be gained just by improving what you have. And then that little sliver that's left is brand new. That's where you put innovation. It's this balanced approach which is more likely than not going to gain you both something new, you're like, wow, I haven't seen that before, but also give you some market success and some actual business success as well. So this is an insight in hindsight about innovation will feel like incredibly innovative at the time, but a balanced approach is probably the right way to go. And then the last thing I worked on before I left Lion Kong was Independence Day game. And it was kind of like Clash of Clans with a little bit of Star Wars. And that was a cool game. But it was the first time I had done like a licensed property. And my attitude on licenses is they're good, but they're not like great. And they come with your share amount of risk. Like not every license is the same, is my warning here. Like you have to pick the right license and and sometimes they're expensive, but they do give you a bit of a heads up in the market. Which has changed quite a bit. So yeah, wrapping that up, be courageous through ignorance. Be Orson Welles as much as you can, but try to find that balance It's really important. Test your products, and user acquisition is noisy, so licenses could help, but I think you want to just be advantageous. I'm just cautious of time, so I'm actually going to fly by this because I want to get to the future section. So currently I'm at Fire Monkeys. We have racing and simulation, as if my career was meant to be, because these are the two things I had worked on up until now. I'm just going to skip this. So this is the time that real racing was actually on stage at the Apple keynote, and it was probably the most important for me. I saw this in North America. I was like, oh my God, what are they doing down there in Australia? This incredible racing game, and it's been 10 years now. 10 years of live service that have kept The Sims Free Play and real racing. Need for Speed's just shortly behind. I think they're in year 7 or 8. So it's going to be 10 years of using all those things I learned about live service and repeatable systems and the value of IP to keep those games going. One thing that's changed in the market is the IDFA. You probably heard this by now, but when this happened and seeing the ramifications of it, I was just reminded of those changes that Facebook made and how that changed the platform. So some years ago, I was like, oh, mobile's, and it still is, don't get me wrong. I mean, ignoring mobile would be foolish, but it's a lot harder than it used to be because it's just harder to get those users. So you have to be pretty creative in how you're going to acquire users because it's just more expensive than it used to be. The other thing that happened in this era is, when I first joined 20 years ago, Fred, he was my mentor, and now all of a sudden I'm the mentor, which is really like, no, I'm not, but I am. So learning how to be a manager means, designing through influence, learning to let go, empowering your team, giving them the confidence to fail, and also making sure that you're giving and receiving feedback on how you can be better, and really giving them those opportunities to shine and facilitate learning and manufacturing obsolescence so that they can replace me. When you're looking at this uncertainty, learn to let go. Choose your mindset and really have a bias towards action. These are just kind of some little bit of advice to managing uncertainty. All right. Sorry I'm flying by because I did want to get to this next section, which is what I call the singularity. So the future, we're here, we're present day. We've gone 23 years now, I'm in 2023. What is it about change in the future that gets me going? Some predictions. This is a book that came out in 2005. Has anyone read this book? Incredible. The same thing one person read it last time. So you all need to read the book. Now you have homework. You need to go read Ray's book about the singularity. And in this book, he predicts the future. So all those red dots were current for him, right? This book came out in 2005. And this is a chart on processing power. And then I was curious. I was like, where are we today? So I went and looked. So the Apple Silicon chips, I couldn't find the actual M2, but I did find the neural engine, which is, it's on that chip. And it quotes 31.6 trillion operations per second. I was like, where is that going to land on this chart? Lo and behold, it's right where it's supposed to be. So that always freaks you out. Like, oh my God, his predictions are coming true. And this goes on to talk about AI a lot. It talks about cybernetics, okay? Don't ignore that it's actually playing out. Yes, generative AI, these are the things that I've made. I made a cyber bunny in a house. This is one that my daughter made when she's put in puppies eating hamburgers while being attacked by snakes. And then here's one made where I got a little nervous because you can tell that the signature is there. So like, okay, we might have some copyright law stuff that we have to worry about. Let me just talk briefly about that. So Campbell Soup, Andy Warhol put out this very famous art. Campbell Soup sued them, said, nope, can't do that. And then the courts say, yeah, it's okay, because the work was transformative. It was in a gallery, it wasn't for profit. I was like, okay, it's fair use. And then Lynn Goldsmith puts this photo of Prince in Vanity Fair, just a photo, right? She got commissioned to do it. And then later, Vanity Fair commissions Andy Warhol to do his art, and then also puts it in Vanity Fair. And just recently, the Supreme Court said, nope, you can't do that. That was illegal. You need to pay Goldsmith for that. Because it wasn't transformative. They were both for profit. They were both. So I'm not a lawyer. I don't pretend to be. I just know that lawyers are going to be very busy. And I actually think lawmakers are going to be even more busy because I think AI is going to introduce all kinds of legal problems. But, the big but, is the horse is already bolted. It's already left the barn. I think you all need to embrace AI because the companies that make games are already embracing AI. And to me, it's a tool like any other tool. Like we've all been using Photoshop and content-aware fill and all these other things and masks for a long time. And if there's anything I see historically in what's happening with technology is that this is the future. So that's I'm sure we can have all kinds of conversations over beers about that, but I'm pretty gung-ho about AI. I'm also gung-ho about platforms. This is the App Store. We talked about all the problems on mobile. That's my daughter's App Store, just from Roblox. I'm very, very bullish on Fortnite creative mode. I think you're going to see a lot of explosion in there. Augmented reality. I did all that work in VR. I believe AR is the future. And yeah, maybe not today in 23 because you can't go buy a headset, but remember the whole decade thing? Remember the whole decade thing? Like, what is music consumption now in 20 after streaming? I always thought it was going to be AR, like you're going to have a concert in your living room. That's still probably true. But with the AI side of things, it's probably also the generation of music. I had not thought of that, but all these things, the Sphere, U2 just had their show there. These drones are also really cool. Here's something for you. Maybe this will happen before I die, but I really want little drones in my hand that I can just kind of go, right, blow, and then they kind of make little things, and I'll call it pixel dust. That'd be the most beautiful thing ever. What happened? Did I lose it? Sorry, I lost my slides. And then because we're almost out of time, I don't want to figure out how to get it back. Oh yeah, I'm almost done. That's it. This is wrapping it up, logarithmic flow, and not the most elegant way to end it, but that's it. Thank you. I have 2 minutes left for questions if you want to just make sure you use this mic. No one? Oh.
So with your moving with change and moving with change in the industry, you're obviously able to adapt to what the company you're working for is trying to do, but how do you predict whether a certain company's approach is going to soon become defunct, or like you did with the Facebook thing turning to mobile? And that's how do you go about trying to predict that or trying to figure that stuff out?
Yeah, first, it's hard. It's hard to predict the future. But I actually think not so much about being defunct. It's more about understanding what trends are on the rise. Right? So first Facebook was kind of obvious, they killed us with the feed thing. But understanding that mobile, that I had a phone in my pocket and that I actually was playing Facebook games or even when I trained. So now when you look at AI and you look at AR and you look at Fortnite creative, there's a growth path, and you could also see how it will continue to evolve. And that's when you want to jump early because it takes time to make product. Right? It takes 2-5 years to actually make something that you want out there. So you want to kind of be ahead, but not too early, because you also want to get that sweet spot of there's enough AR devices out there and so on. So it's hard. I'm not going to say but I think rather than looking for defunctness, you're looking for what's on the rise.
You emphasized earlier in the talk the value of mentoring, going both ways. So obviously a lot of your experience is in larger studios, in AAAs. Do you have any advice for people in indie outfits where they may be the only designer in seeking mentors outside their own company?
Yeah, well, coming to these conferences, first of all, right, this is a huge opportunity. And in fact, I started my career at GDC. So having those conversations, first and foremost. And also don't be afraid to ask. I think there might be this kind of, like, oh, this guy's a celebrity or he guy's in gaming. Anyone in gaming really likes to talk about gaming. And so I try not to have that fear. I think there's also that imposter syndrome too. Like, I still don't feel like I know what I'm talking about, but before you know it, I'll be like, well, I had a whole career in gaming, so I probably do. But so it's just breaking down that fear and making sure you're active in the community. I think it's easy as an indie to just like sit in your home or sit in your office and not be plugged in. So you kind of have to kind of make that effort. Like, it's not comfortable for me to be up here. Like, it's only the second time talking, but I know it's important to get out here and make these connections and talk. So that's it, just to break through that uncomfortableness.
Hey, thanks, Mauro. Thanks for the talk. It was really great. Learnt lots. Very humble. No tall poppy syndrome going on at all. My question is about when you're working for some of the bigger corporations, how do you convince the decision makers, the money decision makers quite often, to be innovative, to try out new platforms, to not be scared about failure?
Again, usually it's money talks. First of all, right? So you want to point to the opportunity and data and testing. That's the other thing. Is particularly in this market, that's the one thing I learned from Zynga was you can be quite cheap in how you test. Right? There's all kinds of talks about you don't even have to build a feature. Just put a pop-up and measure it with a click-through rate. Right? And so I think most executives really like, understanding what the potential is, usually with dollar signs, like this is the potential, and then with low, good ROI, which means low investment but high return. Test your hypotheses. It could be it could be market analysis, it could be surveys, it could be in-game. Using live games as test beds is another important thing. So try to build up a data that supports your argument for big return. I'm getting cut off, so we'll do one more. One more.
You mentioned some interesting things about future is here, ethics around AI technology and such, and we look towards things like singularity is here and such to inform some of our choice around that. God, where have you looked to with new technologies coming forward about where to fall on that line if the horse is bolting? How do you chase that horse? How do you decide to do that?
Well, it's still you can still see the horse. So that's the one thing is get in there and play with the technology. And that's the other thing is they keep that curiosity going and start playing, because then from there you're going to get creativity will come, right? And you have ideas that spawn from it. So it's not that you're going to go all in on it either. That's the thing is try to integrate this stuff into your work small, and then build from there. So you don't want to bet everything on it, but I think you have to be playing with AI, at the very least as inspiration. I mean, you give AI stuff, you get stories back that you had no idea. It's almost like improv. Like play improv with this thing, because it's going to be really, really powerful. And then with imaging, even more so. So I just keep that spirit of curiosity. All right, thank you, everybody.